Today, let me see. We're going through 2 Chronicles 27 through 31, and next week we start Hosea. Okay? We got 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks of Hosea before we've finally gotten through all this mess of kings. Okay? And I'm telling you, mess is right. Let's start today in 2 Chronicles 27. And 2 Chronicles 27 and 2 Kings 16, 17, and 18, 19 sort of all meld together. 2 Chronicles 27 Jotham was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Okay, remember that Jotham was the son of Uzziah or Azariah. Uzziah and Azariah. Everybody recognize that Uzziah and Azariah are the same guy, okay? Uzziah and Azariah are the same guy. Now, Uzziah reigned for 52 years, and his son, Jotham, took over for him. But actually, it says that Jotham reigned for 16 years. He was co-regent for the first 10 years before he became the king. And that was because Uzziah did what? Uzziah went into the temple, and he was going to do his own thing. And the priest said, no, you can't do that. And he stormed around and got upset, and the Lord struck him with leprosy. And so they moved him out of the king's household into a separate place where he stayed for the last 10 years of his reign, but Jotham was sort of in charge. So Jotham got on the job training when he was 15, okay? Started up when he was 15. Now Uzziah is really interesting. Uzziah is mentioned in 2 Kings, and he's mentioned in Chronicles. He's also mentioned in Isaiah 6, okay? And he's also mentioned in the New Testament. Where is he mentioned in the New Testament? Come on now. Matthew 1, the genealogy of Jesus. Uzziah was one of Jesus' predecessors. And now we're coming to Jotham. So he's 25, and he says, he did right in verse 2 in the eyes of the Lord, just like his father. Now Uzziah did a couple of things wrong, but mostly he was very good. And Jotham did things right. But what does it say about the people? But the people continued their corrupt practices. Okay? How hard is it for a people to start responding to good teaching, good preaching, it's really hard to change your habit, isn't it? That's why it's a habit. Something that happens over and over and over, and they just couldn't stop, so they kept burning incense on the Ashtaroth poles, but they didn't have them all knocked down. Well, now Jotham was pretty smart fella. He could see the writing on the wall. He had gone back over and had understood that the prophets were coming to the northern kingdom and to Judah, and he said that they were going to fall. Well, Jotham said, well, it ain't going to happen on my watch. So what did he do? He rebuilt the upper gate of the temple of the Lord, and he built a retaining wall on the hill of Ophel. O-P-H-E-L, okay? And Ophel was the wall that was in Jerusalem before the Israelites got there, when it was the living place of a group of people called the Jebusites. The Jebusites. So he took over and built that, and then he went into all the towns in the hill country around Jerusalem, between Samaria and Jerusalem, the hill country, and he built up the towns, fortified them, and he took all the areas where there were woods and fortified them as well. And in addition to that, he waged war against the king of the Ammonites, it says in verse 5. And that year, the Ammonites paid him a tribute, 100 talents of silver, which was not that big a deal. 100 talents of silver, a lot of rich men had that. But look at what the next thing says. 10,000 cores of wheat and 10,000 cores of barley. Have any idea how much that is? 120,000 bushels. 120. Could you feed a family on 120,000 bushels of barley and wheat? Oh, for a year. I mean, you could feed all of Jerusalem on that. And they paid him that the second and third years. And he became powerful because he walked steadfastly with the Lord. It says in verse 6. The other events are recorded. And I got to tell you, if you go back into 2 Kings 15 and 16, it doesn't talk about Jotham very much. He was a right man. He followed after the Lord. And that's about all it said. Followed after his father. And so it didn't record very much. Those verses is really interesting in this part. I think the guys that are recording all this are starting to get tired of it themselves, because they covered 70 years of Uzziah and Jotham in one chapter, and they covered 5 kings of the northern kingdom in one chapter. And it's sort of like, I'm tired of this, let's kill them all, because that's all they did. You know, they were assassinating the people, and the other kings of the northern kingdom were just assassinating each other, and somebody else was going into their place. And it was very easy for them to get rid of it. Okay, very short chapter. So then we leave that and go into 2 Chronicles 28. Ahaz, okay? Jehoahaz, that's his other name. Jehoahaz. You'll find his name written in other places. Jehoahaz. And Jehoahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Okay, this guy was the worst apple under the tree. I'm telling you. Unlike David his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and he followed the ways of the kings of Israel, and he made idols for worshiping the Baals. Now, verse 3, it says, he burned sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom and sacrificed his children in the fire. Holy mackerel. How do you put, okay, Molech was the god they were sacrificing to, Molech. And that was also the same god that the Carthaginians had in northern Africa. And it was the same god that they had in lower Greece. It was one of the Baals, one of the brothers of the Baals, Molech. And he demanded fire sacrifices of children. Okay? This guy was a big, huge man with a bull's head. Okay? And almost all of the temples that had a Molech worship had him with his arms outstretched slightly down. Arms outstretched slightly down, and his belly extended out into a big cauldron. Okay? Because what happened was, when they worshiped and sacrificed their children, they'd heated up the whole idol. They'd put fire under it, and the idol was hot, and the kids were put on the arms of Molech and rolled down into his belly so that they could be eaten or fired up down in the belly, and they just killed them. Screams were taken out of the worship by drums and flutes and lyres that were all around the god. Now remember this about Molech. Do you remember who created a temple for Molech? I told you about it back in the 1 Kings 11. Solomon, one of his foreign wives was a Molech worshiper, and he created the temple where Ahaz sacrificed his children. Now, I'm sorry, but Solomon's getting a bad mark from me. Okay, he created a lot of temples for a lot of different foreign gods, but particularly this one, and you know it's a pretty shameful operation. Therefore, it says in verse 5 of 28, the Lord his God delivered him into the hands of the king of Aram. Okay, the Arameans defeated him and took many of his people prisoners and brought them back to Damascus. Okay, so Aram, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, is in verse 6, killed 120,000 soldiers of Judah. 120,000 soldiers. And Zechri, an Ephraimite warrior, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, and Azrikam, the officer in charge of the palace, and Elkanah, second to the king. All this happened in that one warfare. So the northern kings, the king of Samaria, remember that sometimes when it says the king of Samaria was also the king of Israel, okay? Because the northern kingdoms were called Samaria. And then the king of Damascus, the Syrians, came down with him. They were trying to bully Ahaz into going up with them and attacking the Assyrian kingdom. Okay? The Assyrians kept coming down and attacking the skirts, and they were trying to get the threesome together to go up and make a unified front against Tilgath-Pilzer. Okay, Tilgath-Pilzer was the king of Assyria at the time, and they were trying to get a unified front, and they were trying to shame Ahaz into doing it. Well, Ahaz didn't want to be talked in it, so he did his own little thing, and he sent that king. Do y'all want to know about the stuff that happened right before that? You know, after the northern kings came down and attacked the Judah, they killed 120,000 of their men, but they carried off 200,000 of their women, children, 200,000 of them. And they walked them all the way from close to Jerusalem up to Samaria. That's a long distance. And they walked many of them up there naked. Naked. And when they got up there, the prophet Obed, it says Oded, but in other places it says Obed. And we can find record of Obed in other places. So the prophet's name was probably Obed. He told the people of the north, and if you'll read in here, the leaders called Ephraim, the leaders of the north were sometimes called Ephraimites, or all the others that were the Manasseh and Ephraim were the two sons of Joseph. And sometimes they called the northern kingdoms Ephraim, just like they called the southern kings just Judah. Okay? But they're still Judah, and it's still the northern kings. So they got up there and they reclothed the people and sent them back home. Okay, well, look, that didn't help anybody down there because they still had a bad taste in their mouth. Ahaz made an appeal to the king of Syria to come down and help him. Okay, the Edomites were coming, and that's probably a mistake because the word for Edom and the word for Assyria were close to each other. So the Philistines were raiding their towns around them, and they were capturing a bunch of different areas. There was war all the time going on at this time along this front where the trade front was along the Mediterranean Sea. So the king of Assyria took the hint from Ahaz that he was in trouble and came down and said, "Yeah, I'll take care of it for you." So he wiped out the guy in Damascus, the Syrian king that had come down with the northern kingdom to help wipe out Ahaz at the time. The Assyrian king came down and wiped him completely out, and then he invited Ahaz up to Damascus for a little conference. Well, what was the conference about? Well, the conference was, give me your tribute, okay? Give me your tribute money, give me your tribute crops, give me your tribute cattle, give me your tribute everything, and I'll show you what you need to do to be my vassal, okay? To be underneath me, you need to do this. Everybody that he conquered had to worship their gods, the Assyrian gods, and they had to worship them on a particular kind of altar, and that's what he did. He showed him the kind of altar, and Ahaz had sent one of his chief priests for the king of Assyria to show him exactly how to make that altar so that he could go back down to Jerusalem and make that altar. That's what he did. The priest didn't miss a lick. He just went up there to Damascus, found out how to do it, came back down to Jerusalem, and that's what he did. He built an altar for the Assyrian king just outside the temple. Okay? And how did he do it? He didn't have enough bronze to do it, so he had to take the sides off of the altar of the Lord. So he took the sides off the altar of the Lord, and he used those to melt down and make new bronze altar for Tilgath-Pileser, so that he would be happy with him in his worship when he came there. And he told the priest that he would make his morning offering, his moon offerings, his drink offerings, all the blood offerings he was going to do on this one stage. And because he had taken the sides off of the Lord's temple, he closed down the temple. He just locked it down. Everything was outside of the temple now, so to make the offerings. So the people could still see it, and they would see that Ahaz was doing all this nasty offerings to this god of Assyria. That was terrible. Ahaz didn't have very much redeeming qualities to him, and he didn't last very long. And when he died, they took him and buried him, but they didn't bury him with the kings. You get the idea? The people knew that he was a terrible guy. And so they buried him over in Jerusalem, but they didn't bury him with the kings. So his son came in. Hallelujah, we're going to finally come to something good. Okay? Ahaz is dead, and Hezekiah, his son. Hezekiah. How many people know Hezekiah? Huh? Everybody knows Hezekiah, right? Because there's a great story about Hezekiah. It's not in these few chapters, but we're going to get it next week. Okay? Great story about Hezekiah. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. Now, everybody can add that up. That's like 54 years, right? What was the average lifespan of an adult male in this time period? 42. 42 was the average lifespan of a man in this time frame. 42. So when you look back at these other guys, Jotham and Ahaz, they lived pretty close to the normal lifespan. Okay? But Hezekiah, he went a little bit further. And interesting, when you read all these things, the first thing that you come to is his mother's name. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. Okay? Why did they record those things? Well, they recorded it because most of the girls of the guys that did good came from priestly families. Zechariah was a priest. Okay? And his daughter, Abijah, was one of his daughters. they got good teaching from the priest at home. Everybody, pay attention, okay? You got a priest at home. The mother was the one who taught the son to pay attention to the Lord, okay? The mothers, okay? I mean, this, his mother was the daughter of a priest. So she got good preaching from her father, but she was the mother of the king, and so she did a good job raising him to let him know who God was, okay? Now, there's a lot of interesting debate going on. I know none of us, well, maybe none of us, there may be a couple of you, who read scholarly works about the Bible, where they show how they got this and they got that, and other sources where there's background materials that show that this is right and that's right, and they read and talk about the language and how the language is a little bit tweaked here and a little bit tweaked there. And there's all these guys out there saying, well, 1 Kings 16, 17, 18, those were a late edition. They were not in the original language. They're found in the original works, okay? A lot of them say that they're not worthy of reading because they weren't written the right way. Well, what makes you so sure of that? They're all in the same scroll. How can you be so sure? Well, there's a lot of debate going on, okay? So, one of the things that's really important is the fact that these are all good, solid works. To try to say that you don't believe them just because there's a little tweak in the language, you're really getting out on thin ice, okay? So it's really important to pay attention to what they actually do say, and the things that they don't say. Just sort of like the Bible is silent, be silent. You don't need to be talking about things that you don't know the answer to. That's sort of dumb. But that's just me. That's just me. Okay, so he did that was what was right in the eyes of the Lord. So in verse 3 of 2 Chronicles 29, we start with the great stuff of Hezekiah. The first month of the first year of his reign. The first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temples and repaired them. He brought the priests and the Levites and assembled in the square on the east side of the temple and said, listen to me. And you can read that several ways, but the bottom line is, listen to me. Consecrate yourselves now and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove all the defilement from the sanctuary. Now, is he starting off pretty good? Pretty good, okay? Our parents were unfaithful. Oh, my goodness, he is striking out. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord and forsook him. They turned their faces away from his dwelling place and turned their backs on him. They shut the doors. They didn't burn incense. They didn't do burnt offerings. Therefore, the anger of the Lord has fallen on Judah and Jerusalem. He has made them an object of dread, horror, and scorn, as you can see with your own eyes. Okay? This is why our fathers have fallen by the sword, and our sons and daughters and our wives have been led away into captivity. Okay. He says in verse 10, now I intend to make a covenant with the Lord. I, the king, make a covenant with the Lord so that his fierce anger will turn away from us. Wow, this guy is on fire. My sons, he calls, they're older than he is. My sons, do not be negligent now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand before him and serve him, to minister before him and to burn incense. Okay, so it goes, my wife tried to read all the names of these to me on our trip back from Dallas-Fort Worth this weekend. And She said her jaws got tired trying to shape the names of all these things. But let's not read all the names. Let's just understand that they're all the Levites, the Kohathites, the Gershonites, all of the different varieties. Now listen, the fact that they broke these into several different groups says they had the law of Moses. Some of these guys that I talked about earlier who said that this is an incomplete scripture, this is something that was put in later, they talk about these things because they say they didn't have the law of Moses. That's poppycock. Everything he states here comes directly from the law of Moses. Most of it out of Leviticus 1, Leviticus 3, Leviticus 16. He tells exactly how to purify the temple, exactly how to purify something that's unclean, exactly how much should he do. When they assembled and they consecrated themselves, they went in to purify the temple, and boy, I'm telling you, they went after it like a house of fire. Down in 17, they began the consecration the first day of the first month, and the 8th day of the month, they reached the portico. Okay? And when they went in to Hezekiah and reported, we have purified the entire temple of the Lord, the altar of burning offering with all its utensils, and the table for setting the consecrated bread with all its articles. We prepared and consecrated all the articles that King Ahaz removed with his unfaithfulness while he was king, and they are now in front of the Lord's altar. Okay, what did he do? He said, let's offer on it. And he got 7 bulls and 7 rams, 7 male lambs, and 7 male goats as a sin offering. All these things are prescribed out of the law of Moses. You had to read it, you had to know it in order to how much. And normally it was just one. But when it was a great sin and he was doing it for the body of people, body of believers, prescribed for 7. So he did, 7. The king commanded the priests, and they offered them. And let's go on down. He stationed the Levites in the temple. Now listen, at some point in time, we really need to go over David's transgression with musical instruments. Y'all heard me, right? David brought musical instruments in. God did not tell him to bring them in. He brought them in because he liked them. And he liked the way they sounded. Okay? And they continued, okay, to bring the musical instruments in. And Asaph, the one who wrote a number of the Psalms, continued to use musical instruments. So it says here, so the Levites stood ready with David's instruments and the priests and the trumpets. Hezekiah gave the order to sacrifice the burnt offerings, and the offering began. Singing to the Lord began, accompanied by trumpets and instruments. The whole assembly bowed in worship. All this continued. When the offerings were finished, the king and everyone present knelt and worshipped. King Hezekiah and his officials ordered the Levites to praise the Lord with the words of David and Asaph. Okay? Now you've dedicated yourselves to the Lord. Come and bring sacrifices and thank offerings to the temple of the Lord. So the assembly brought sacrifices and thank offering. Okay. They got through cleansing the thing. They made their offering for Thanksgiving. And they made their offering for the sin offering. And now he's going to say, let's do something that we haven't done in years. And years. Let's go ahead and do a Passover. Can you believe that? Years have passed and there was no Passover in Israel. None. But Hezekiah, because he read the law of Moses, knew they were supposed to do it. And he said, I'm going to send a word out to all of Israel. This is 2 Chronicles 30, verse 1. Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover. The king and his officials and the whole assembly decided to celebrate the Passover in the 2nd month. Okay, they missed the 1st month. It's supposed to be the 1st month, the 14th day, right? Everybody say yes. Okay. First month, 14th day. All right. They missed it. Why'd they miss it? The Levites weren't consecrated. The priests weren't consecrated. They all had to be consecrated. And now that he's done that, now that he's done all that, he said, you know, maybe the Lord will forgive us because I'm calling us back to what we're supposed to be doing. I'm a month late. God, please forgive me. And he says they were not able to celebrate at a regular time because not enough priests were consecrated. Plans seemed right to the king and the whole assembly, and they called them from one end of the kingdom to the other. As the king's command, couriers went out through Israel, and he went, and he says, people of Israel, return to the Lord. This is verse 6. Return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to you who are left. Who are left. Okay? This is after the northern kingdoms were gone. He knew that the prophets had been saying the northern kingdom is going to be carried away. They've been saying it for 150 years, and it was. And there was information in there that the prophet said the southern kingdom, Judah, is going to be carried away if they don't change their ways. If they don't change their ways. Well, Hezekiah said, I'm going to change the ways. I'm going to bring us back. So return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and he may return to you who are left, who have escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. Do not be like your parents and your fellow Israelites, who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their ancestors, so that he made them an object of horrors. You see, do not be stiff-necked, as your ancestors were. Submit to the Lord. Come to his sanctuary, which he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. If you return to the Lord, then your fellow Israelites and your children will be shown compassion by their captors and will return to this land. He's talking about bringing the northern kingdoms back. Return to this land, for the Lord your God is gracious and compassionate. He will not turn his face from you if you return to him. So the couriers went everywhere throughout all of Israel, and a great crowd came together, and they slaughtered, in verse 15, they slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the second month. Wrong month. Wrong month. Right day. Wrong month. The priests and the Levites were ashamed and consecrated themselves and brought forth burnt offerings to the temple. They took up their regular positions. Now, there were regular positions for each type of priest in the entire assembly. Okay? They had their station, and they had to be at their station for the right service to be taken care of. And although most of the people who came from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun were not purified, they still ate the Passover contrary to what was written. And Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, may the Lord who is good pardon everyone who sets their heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of their ancestors, even if they are not clean according to the rules of the sanctuary. And the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. Were they sick? Were they sick? Where? Spiritually. They were sick in their hearts and their spirits. And he healed them. And the Israelites who were present celebrated the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days with great rejoicing. Okay? So it was so great that they offered up, and verse 27, the whole assembly then agreed to celebrate the festival 7 more days. They had such a good time celebrating and praising God that they did it for another 7 days. Hezekiah, now listen to what he gave. Hezekiah, king of Judah, provided 1,000 bulls, 7,000 sheep, and goats for the assembly. And the officials provided them with 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep and goats. They fed the entire Israel the Passover for 2 weeks. The number of priests consecrated, the entire assembly of Judah rejoiced, along with the priests and the Levites, including foreigners who come from Israel and who resided in Judah. There was great joy in Jerusalem, For since the days of Solomon, son of David, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. Now, how long was that? That's almost 300 years that they'd been without the Passover. The priests and the Levites stood to bless the people, and God heard them, for their prayer reached heaven, his holy dwelling place. When all this had ended, the Israelites went, this is Chronicles 31. When all this had ended, the Israelites who were there went into the towns of Judah, and look what they did. They smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asheroth poles. They destroyed the high places and the altars throughout Judah and Benjamin and Ephraim and Manasseh. And after they destroyed them, the Israelites returned to their own houses and to their own property. Okay, what happened next? They were blessed. Look at all that was given to them. If you read the next 10 verses, it talks about all the stuff, and they brought their tithe to the temple, and there was so much that it was heaped up. They had heaps of tithes that they had to build store buildings for them to keep the tithes in. So the priests, the Levites, all of them, which were supposed to be fed on this stuff, they were getting fat, I guess, because they were full. They said they had plenty to spare because the Lord had blessed the people, and this amount is left over. Verse 11, Hezekiah gave orders to prepare storerooms, and they did that. And it goes on to tell about all the names of all the different priests and Levites, and how they consecrated them, and how they continued to do their job. And all of them, the genealogies were prepared from 3 years old upward, and all the Levites that were 20 years old served, because that's what the law demanded. That's what the law demanded. Now, I know many of you know that Josiah found the law of Moses deep somewhere in the temple. That was 70 years later. Hezekiah had the law. He knew. So somebody had taken it and put it away. In 70 years, do you think all those people were dead? Not a chance. There were still people alive when Josiah came into power and started bringing the Passover feast back. There were people who had celebrated that feast with Hezekiah. The priests, the descendants of Aaron, lived in the farmlands, and they were designated by name. This is what Hezekiah did throughout Judah, doing what was good, right, and faithful before the Lord. In everything he undertook the service of God's temple in obedience to the law and the commands. He sought his God and wholeheartedly worked toward it, and he was prospered. Well, I got to tell you, just the fact that he did all those things, and he didn't hesitate. I mean, he hit the ground running. His daddy was a worthless bunk. Terrible. We're going next into Hosea. Okay? So we're leaving off in Chronicles. I don't want to leave off. I gotta go to this next section. Sennacherib threatens Jerusalem. Now Sennacherib was the king of Assyria that followed Tilgath-Pileser. Okay? He was the next king in Assyria. And he came and he started invaded Judah, and he invaded all the housing and the small cities and the places in the hill country before they got to Jerusalem. And he's in the city, the next big city before Jerusalem, which was Lachish. Okay? And he said, this is what Sennacherib, king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing your confidence that you remain in Jerusalem under siege? When Hezekiah says that Lord our God will save us from the hand of the king of Assyria, he is misleading you to let you die of hunger and thirst. Did not Hezekiah himself remove his God's high places and altars, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before one altar and burn sacrifices? Do you not know what I and my predecessors have done to all the peoples of all the other lands where the gods of the nations were able to deliver them from my hand? No. Who of all the gods of these nations that my predecessors destroyed has been able to save his people? How then can your God deliver you from my hand? Now, do not let Hezekiah deceive you and mislead you in this. Do not believe him, for no God of any nation or kingdom has been able to deliver his people from my hand or from the hand of my predecessors. How much less will your God deliver you from my hand? Boy, talk about signing a death wish. When you curse God to his face, when you curse... So, the officer spoke this to Hezekiah, and Hezekiah prayed. Hezekiah the prophet, Isaiah, son of Amoz, cried in prayer to heaven about this. And the Lord sent an angel. This is verse 21 and 32. And the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the commanders and officers in the camp of the Assyrian king. So he withdrew to his own land in disgrace. And when he went into the temple of his gods, some of his sons, his own flesh and blood, cut him down with a sword. Tell you what, Hezekiah was a praying man. And if nothing wants to make you want to pray, to look and see what he did turning around, his daddy was worthless guy. And Hezekiah immediately hit the ground running, praying, consecrating, trying to get everything clean back for the Lord. And Sennacherib, right on the tail end of all that, huge force, 187,000 men, annihilated. How quick? One day. One day. You think God's angels... I'm sorry, how many angels did he send? One. And God has an army of angels. If we're not praying, we should be. And we need to remember how wonderful it is to be able to pray to a God who loves you enough to give his Son for you and will continue to protect you with his army of angels everywhere you go, declaring God's name on high. You're protected. Oh yeah, you might die, but you're not going to die. Your flesh will die, and it's going to die. But your spirit, God loving, will continue with him. Go with me to God in prayer. Father God, we thank you for the lesson of all the kings. Father, some of them were very hard to understand, and very hard to believe, and very hard to get to understand and know what they had in their minds and their hearts. There were so many that were wrong. But Father, we are so thankful that you provided good examples to us as well of the kings and how their love for you flowed to you and how you respond to your children giving you the love and prayers and adoration that you are worthy of. Help us, Father, each day to find more and more about your loving care for us and to give that back to you in praise and adoration. Help us, Father, each day to find more and more love in our hearts for you because you have given us everything. Thank you for the Son that you gave for us and set us free. Thank you for all these things, and we praise you and give you honor